What happens at the very moment when the heart stops and the breath ceases? Does everything end, or is it just the beginning? Over the past few months of the year 2024, stories have spread across the world that make us reconsider the very concept of death. Not just coincidences, not just the delirium of a dying brain, but real testimonies from people who returned from the edge, from the other side, the side we know almost nothing about, yet hear more and more about. It started with ordinary news. British pensioner Dave Singleton, 85 years old, survived a cardiac arrest. He was gone for 8 minutes. By all medical standards, he was dead. But when he was brought back to life, he said that all this time he had been in a garden. Yes, exactly, green hills, gentle sun, the voice of his beloved wife who had died 20 years ago. He says he didn't want to come back. And his eyes, the eyes of someone who truly saw something. Not a dream. Not a hallucination. But another world. Then there was the story of Charlotte Holmes, 68 years old, from the state of Arkansas. Her case went viral. She went for a routine heart examination and died. For 31 minutes. During that time, according to her, she passed through gates of light, saw deceased relatives, and then, and this was the most terrifying part, the edge of hell. The smell of rot, moans, shadows screaming from the depths. She says, it wasn't a warning. It was a reminder that we still have a choice. What is this? An illusion? A random surge of hormones in a dying brain? Or, is someone truly showing us something more? When you hear such stories one after another, you can't help but start asking questions. Especially when there are cases involving young, physically healthy people. For example, the story of Ukrainian National Guard Captain Oleksandr Vyrych. Young, 24 years old. Shrapnel wound to the head. His heart stopped. For a short time, but it was enough. He saw himself from the outside. Heard the medics shouting his name. He says he felt the presence of someone nearby. Not an angel, not a devil, just a force, watching him. Too many coincidences. Too many details to dismiss. But perhaps the most frightening story came from Zakarpattia. Adelina Tokok. 19 years old. She experienced clinical death twice, once in childhood and recently, as a teenager. Both times almost the same. Separation from the body. Light, voices. The second time, she says she felt someone holding her back, not letting her go. As if her time hadn't come yet. Interestingly, all these people aren't just sharing their stories. Their outlook on life changes. They become calmer, wiser. They speak of love, forgiveness, the value of the moment. As if they truly understood something, saw something. And now the question arises, if their stories are true, then what is on the other side? But don't rush to conclusions. Because what comes next is only stranger. In the middle of the year 2024, an incident occurred in Michigan that unsettled even the skeptics. A young woman named Jenna Marlowe was involved in a serious car accident. The vehicle flipped over on the highway, and she sustained injuries incompatible with life. Doctors recorded cardiac arrest. 9 minutes of clinical death. When she was brought back, she screamed. Not from pain, but from fear. She begged not to be sent back there. Later, she said, at first there was light, then something resembling a waiting room like in old train stations. People sat there, silently, with empty eyes. No one moved. And silence. She said, I felt that this was a place in between. Not hell. And not heaven. But something, frozen. As if souls had nowhere to go. And this is where it gets most interesting. Jenna had never been interested in religion, esotericism, or afterlife practices. But after this incident, she began studying ancient texts, delving into Vedic and Christian teachings. And she claims, "We have forgotten who we are. We were given a chance, life. And we wasted on emptiness. But this is not forever. They are watching us. Silently. Patiently. Are you still here? Then listen further. Because there's something that didn't make it into the media." A confidential report from an American hospital in Texas, made public through a leak, mentions 5 patients who experienced clinical death within the span of 1 month. All 5 described the same experience. A dark corridor, light at the end, and a figure standing at the threshold. Someone tall, in black. No face. Just a silhouette. He didn't say anything. Just watched. These patients didn't know each other. Their stories were documented by different doctors. Coincidence? Or a pattern? There is a theory put forward by scientists from the United Kingdom. During death, parts of the brain that had never been active before begin to function. Some even say we connect to something greater. A collective consciousness. Ancestral memory. Or a system we have forgotten. Or one we are not allowed to remember. But if this is really the case, who erases that memory? And why do we forget what we see there? There is another detail that repeats in almost every account. A state of absolute peace. Not joy. Not fear. But peace. As if everything we cling to here, work, money, grudges, holds no meaning whatsoever. There, everything becomes obvious. But here's the twist: almost no one wants to talk about what exactly becomes clear. Everyone avoids giving a direct answer. Why? Could it be that the truth is too simple? Or, on the contrary, too terrifying? There is an opinion that people who have experienced clinical death begin to see through the veil. As if they had, for a second, peeked behind the curtain of the play called life. But what exactly they see there remains a mystery. Or perhaps they are not allowed to speak? In one episode of an independent podcast released in November of the year 2024, a story was told by a former medic of the U.S. Air Force. A man, who kept his identity hidden, claimed that he participated in experiments that recorded brain activity during the final seconds of life. He insisted that some patients, literally a second before death, began to speak in unknown languages. One such case, a soldier, severely wounded on the battlefield, during a moment of clinical death whispered a long phrase in ancient Aramaic. No one present understood it, but the recording was saved. Later, it was deciphered and turned out to be a prayer. A very old one. Its analog exists only in a single manuscript found in Mesopotamia. A random activation of ancient memories? Or do we carry something within us much older than our personal memory? It's hard to prove. But here's what is alarming: almost all who survive death begin to speak about being heard. Not seen, not saved, but specifically heard. Someone or something, from the other side, responded to their thoughts. As if the boundary between worlds is not a wall, but a thin veil that can be lifted, under certain conditions. Do you still believe all this is just coincidence? One doctor from Israel, Yoram Ben-Ori, wrote in a medical journal that among patients who returned from clinical death, 38% exhibited the same symptoms. They stop fearing death. But not from apathy, rather because it's good there. Not in the sense of comfortable or joyful. But, right. Everything falls into place. Even pain disappears. Horror vanishes. And an understanding arises: life is not the end. It is merely a stage. Do you feel how the tension shifts? As if the answer is about to be revealed. As if someone is about to say, yes, it's true. This is what's there. But the answer never comes. And then one question remains. The most important. And if all of this is true, why don't we remember it from birth? Why do we lose this knowledge as we age, instead of getting closer to it? Some say, it's a protection. Others, that it's a punishment. And some, that it's a test. And we either pass it, or we don't. Meanwhile, everyone who's been there comes back with the same words: live. Forgive. Don't be afraid. Because fear is not what holds us back. Fear is what keeps us from remembering. And maybe, in the year 2024, humanity has come to the very edge. One more step and the veil will open completely. Sometimes it seems that all these stories are not just random episodes. They are being laid out like a mosaic, piece by piece, and with each new fragment, the outlines of another world become clearer. Light, shadows, voices, spaces where time does not exist. But what if all this time we've been looking in the wrong direction? In December of the year 2024, a strange video appeared from a private clinic in Nevada. A young patient, whose heart had stopped for 7 minutes, began to draw after he was revived. Not just something abstract, but precise architectural structures resembling labyrinths with perfect symmetry. He had never drawn before. The doctors were shocked. When asked what it was, he replied, "I saw a city. It's not from our world. But I was there. And it's waiting for all of us." He called the city a word he didn't understand himself, Al-Nura. Later, it turned out that some Sufi texts mention its spiritual city of Al-Nur, which is not built by hands. A coincidence? Or an echo of deeper knowledge that awakens at the moment of death? There is another story that gives no peace. Texas, October of 2024. An elderly man, a veteran, was brought to intensive care. He was clinically dead for over 11 minutes. After returning, he remained silent for several days, refusing to speak. And then he said a phrase that the nurse wrote down word for word: "I saw her. She remembers me. And she is waiting." Who she was is unknown. Relatives say his wife passed away 30 years ago. But he wasn't talking about her. Obviously, it was another presence. Deeper. Perhaps death itself? These stories are both intriguing and disturbing. They don't feel like fiction. They have rhythm and inner truth. People who live through them no longer return to normal life. Because for them, nothing is normal anymore. They seem to know something we do not. Why is this important right now? Because in recent years something is changing. The number of clinical death cases is increasing, where people not only saw the light, but brought back knowledge. And not some abstract visions, but specific words, symbols, names. Information they could not have known. And maybe the truth is that we have always known. We just forgot. And now it's time to remember. So what do we have? More than 24 documented stories within the span of 1 year. People of different ages, from different countries, different religions, yet their experiences share one strange common thread: the feeling that they crossed a boundary. That they saw something which cannot be described in ordinary words. And they came back changed. However, there is another detail that few talk about. In several cases, according to witnesses, those who experienced clinical death temporarily retained the ability to hear. Not voices, but thoughts, intent, presence. As if, for a few hours or days, they were still standing with one foot there. And the boundary between worlds remained open. In one story, a man, after returning, warned for several days about an accident which indeed happened soon after. In another, a woman named the person whom the family had been trying to find for more than 20 years. She said, "He is there. But he hasn't left yet." And he asked me to say, "I'm sorry." Sounds like mystification? Maybe. But then why are there so many of them? And why, in the past year, are these stories becoming louder and louder? Some believe that we are living in a time when the boundary between worlds is thinning. Not because of mysticism, but due to the very nature of our era. Technology, artificial intelligence, shifting biorhythms, global turbulence, all of it seems to be pushing us closer to a truth we've long repressed. Maybe the afterlife is not a place, but a state. A field of consciousness that we enter when we let go of the body. And perhaps, right now, humanity is approaching a threshold where knowledge of this is starting to leak back into our world. One woman, who was 72 at the moment of clinical death, said, "I saw myself. But not the one others saw. The real me. Bright, strong. And I realized that all this time, we forget who we truly are." This is not an empty phrase. She said it with such calm, as if it were a fact. Like an address. Like a number. And now, the question is for you. What if all of this is not just the memory of a dying brain? What if all of this is an invitation? Not a warning, but a key. A chance to remember why we are here. And what awaits next? We are not giving you the answer. We are not telling you what to believe. We are only showing the fragments that revealed themselves to people in the year 2024. And from here, the choice is yours. Because sometimes, to see the truth, you just need to stop and listen. And what if it's already near?